Okay, got it. Okay, I will start again and okay. Mm, Good morning. Okay, and early morning to Haje, and good morning, afternoon, and evening to all participants who join us through ICRS YouTube channel. Welcome to panel 19, the fourth International Conference on Indigenous Religion. My name is Anna. I am from Rumah Bersama and I will host this panel for about 90 minutes. The title of this panel is Stories from Asia. And as you see in the poster, for this panel, we will have three great speakers. First, we have Tolekan Ismailova, uh, and also Mr. Murad Karipov. Tolekan is from Kyrgyzstan. She is the director of human rights organization in Kyrgyz, Birduino. Sorry if I misspelling. And the
Yeah.
title of her presentation is Climate and Crisis: The Situation with the Fundamental Rights of Citizens as Alternative for SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. And the second speaker is Haje Saje. He is PhD candidate from University of Hamburg or Vienna. He lives in Brussels, so it is like 5 a.m. in the morning, Haje, right? Okay, and the title of his presentation is Decoloniality and Epistemic Justice, Rethinking Indigenous Religion in Contemporary Religious Studies. And last, soon will be join us. We have Dr. Samsul Ma'arif. He is the director of Center of Religion and Cross-Cultural Studies, University of Gadjah Mada, Yogyakarta, Indonesia. And he will give his insight as well as reflection from the two presentations in the context of Indonesia. So without further ado, I will give to Tolekan. The time and the screen is yours. Okay.
Good morning. Thank you so much, dear Anna, for your and colleague great initiative, because I think it's first time we have these topics and the special issue from Southeast and Central Asia. And I think we are living in a difficult and tragic time. And we talk about climate and crisis, because it's not only Central Asia or South Asia or other region affected by crisis, because radical climate change affected all our people, and especially vulnerable groups, especially women and children and indigenous people, because Murad later will give our presentation, and he will show you how we found together with our partners gaps in community level, because community level also don't have a good joint strategy, because they divided. Local authority focus for different strategy, and indigenous people don't have any voice because they don't have access information and don't have real equal participation for decision-making process. I think when we discuss with our partners, especially when we organize strategic key laboratoire and the International Documentary Film Festival, we found that we have gaps from local community level to global level, because in global level sometimes we have very nice special issue through UN committees for human rights or European Union and all other very key institution in global level, but this only in English levels, in English language. And local people, especially indigenous people, don't have access information. And that's why they marginalized, and they then don't have a clear picture, clear strategy, how we'll do from local level to global, they new innovation strategy. And in another hand, we have a terrible situation. For example, in Kyrgyzstan, we have these 5 countries, Central Asia, and we have terrible time because Taliban now became in power in Afghanistan, and we have border conflicts, other conflicts, and especially when we look to Turkmenistan, you will see how Turkmen government repeat all Taliban actions and create aggression for women and girls in Turkmenistan. Each month they produce a different degree against women and against indigenous people also. And that's why when you focus for Central Asia, especially Kyrgyzstan, were affected by war in Ukraine.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Because
Okay, I'm sorry to cut you. You sent me the PowerPoint. Would you like to present the PowerPoint or later?
Yeah, and it will be my general introduction because a second issue is Ukraine war affect all region because Eastern Europe and Central Asia, because under function we became more poverty and became extreme poverty and crisis and disasters. I think Murat will give now presentation, and because we prepared together this with our staff, and he will join and present our Kyrgyzstan case and the key strategic issue. Thank you, Anna.
Thank
Murat?
you, Kan. So, Mas Akbar, can you make Murat host or co-host? Okay.
Thank you so much, dear partners, dear colleagues. As it was perfectly emphasized by the director of the Human Rights Movement Building Kyrgyzstan, Mrs. Tolikana Sanarivna Ismailova. So nowadays we see the situation with the increasing amount of crisis in Central Asian region. Let me just briefly present some latest information regarding our work implemented by the Human Rights Movement Building Kyrgyzstan. Tell me, please, if you can see the presentation. Okay, so regarding the special issues and nowadays the topic from the Southeast and Central Asia, this presentation was prepared by the director, Tolikana Sanarivna Ismailova, regarding the topic on the climate and crisis, and now present situation with the fundamental rights of citizens, alternative for the sustainable development goals. So we can see that now this year, as it was emphasized perfectly, the increasing rate of poverty and extreme poverty and crisis in Central Asian region in the face of increasing risks and disasters. So it was a great influence of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it directly influenced and directly affected on the situation regarding the human rights, not only in Kyrgyzstan, but also in the countries of Central Asian region. And influence of poverty was also affected by the Russian invasion in Ukraine, as it was mentioned by Mrs. Tolikana Sanarivna Ismailova. And this conflict actually resulting the sanctions are likely to affect our economy, our political situation. And right now, for example, according to the latest research work of Birdina Kyrgyzstan, Kyrgyzstan is one of the leading countries in Central Asia by the number of people who are nowadays who are victims of the slavery. For example, here on the screen, you can see the latest numbers. For example, right now, starting from the last 6 years, the amount of people who became victims of the sexual labor and other kinds of slavery increased. So nowadays, Kyrgyzstan, you can see, is more than 2,000 of people who are victims of this slavery. So as a next point, we should identify and emphasize the access to justice for people who survived of gender-based violence and impunity. So according to the latest reports of the international regarding the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, here we can see that the details concerned with the regard of laws related to rape and other forms of sexual violence, as well as the harmful practices and procedures. So it directly affects and actually denies access to justice for people who survived of such kinds of violence and discrimination. It should be also emphasized about the border conflict between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. Because it was the act of violence from the Tajik side, from the Tajik army, and our country was attacked on the border, and especially local communities and civilians, they faced such violence, and they suffered in Batken district in the south of Kyrgyzstan. And according to the information of Kyrgyz Border Service, all the facilities, a lot of people died. And actually, this conflict, it's not all happened only this year, and it was also in previous years. And a lot of people who live directly, especially local communities, women and girls, they were directly victims of such facts of aggression. Also, we should identify such point like a discriminatory laws that are initiated in our country, because they are directly aimed for shrinking of civic space and to restrict the fundamental rights and freedoms of citizens. Such laws are, for example, law on mass media, the law on non-profit NGOs in our country, because actually they are some of the national authorities, they have purposes to initiate the, additional limitations and additional artificial barriers for the NGOs in order to control their activities. But also we would like to inform you about some positive results of our implemented work regarding the projects. For example, a very good experience and very good result that was implemented regarding in partnership with the Global Network for Disaster Risk Reduction, GNDR. And the mutual project was the view from the front lines that started since 2018, so 4 years ago, and it was the purpose was to decrease the gaps between the local communities and policy decision makers in local communities who live directly in the risks or in the risk zones, and they face different socioeconomic and ecological disasters. Like in Osh, Jalalabad, and Issyk regions in our country. And this research work actually was in order to identify these problematic issues and identify the gaps between the local communities, and to deliver the voices of the local communities from local to global level, because it was the most peculiar and important point of this project. So here you can see the map, and we should identify very important point regarding that. You know that nowadays Kyrgyzstan has the leading position regarding because we have 92 uranium tailings. That is some kind of heritage of the post-Soviet Union, and it's very important point that should be underlined, that in the case of some maybe natural or artificial disasters and threats, the negative influence of radiation of these uranium tailings can spread not only in Kyrgyzstan, but all on the territory of all over the Central Asian region. And it means that the disasters can improve with great rate, and it will cover the millions of people in the Central Asian region. So regarding the implemented project view from the front line, we identified the serious risks for the people of Central Asian countries that are emerging, and it is also we developed the specific working plans in cooperation with the local communities, with the women councils, with the representative of the indigenous people directly involved them, also elder council. So I mean that we invited directly our beneficiaries, local communities who are directly influenced by the different risks and threats. And it was very important point and good experience. And all these selected regions, we also created a National Advisory Committee, NAC, with the involvement of some particular national departments, NGOs, Ombudsman Office, the Council of Defense, local self-government bodies. So it was really great work that provided us opportunity to involve more and more partners, because when we are talking about the disaster risk reduction, it's very important to invite all possible our beneficiaries, partners, NGOs, and experts from civic society. So according to the result, we identified the research work and covered more than 1,500 of different local communities, and it was the surveys and questionnaires, and it helped us to identify the specific problems of the local communities. For example, 22% of the local government representatives, they identified that the problematic with the water resources. It was access to for water supplies. It means that they directly identified the problem with sustainable development goals. And actually, it was information of indigenous people. So it means that this information was really true to fact. And so the 35%, 36% of the respondents, they identified that it's necessary to involve local communities for the process of decision making. So it's very important because nowadays they are directly separated from such processes. And also, just for instance, 27% of the respondents, they identified the risks of from the mud flows because it's very problematic issue in our region. Also just some additional numbers regarding the results of our work in the south of region, like in Osh and Jalabad districts of Kyrgyzstan. All our beneficiaries, respondents, with involvement of indigenous people, they identified the necessity to reduce the conflicts and on the local level, because, for example, as you know, in 2010, 12 years ago, it was the actual effects of initial aggression between the Kyrgyz and Uzbek people, and it was a lot of victims of the violence. And our organization, Human Rights Movement within Kyrgyzstan, we protected the rights of the victim. Azimjan Askarov, the leader of the local community who died in the prison, and because he was abused without any accusation, and actually he was imprisoned for more than 20 years, and he died in this during his imprisonment. And also some of the positive result of our work of the Berdino Kyrgyzstan, that we annually conduct the International Documentary Film Festival on the human rights. And for example, this year that we invited a lot of directors, a lot of documentary films from all over the world, like from France, Sweden, Czech Republic, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, and our local directors for the documentary films. And this competition program of the festival included 22 documentary films, 16 national and more than five foreign documentary films. Actually, this event, it provides opportunity for all people, because all the screenings of the documentary films, they are absolutely free of charge, and they are open for any people who would like to get informed, to get new information, new details and evidence regarding the situation with the human rights in the other countries, and to share their vision. Because, you know, according to the program of the film festival, we conduct not only the screenings but also discussion laboratories. And during these events, we try to initiate critical discussion, to work to develop specific recommendations for the policymakers. We try to involve directly representatives of the local communities, leaders, youth, women councils, women leaders, women deputies from different regions of Kyrgyzstan, especially distant from mountainous regions, because it's important for them, because they are limited in the access for qualitative information. And so here you can see that as a result of my presentation, all the information sources, all the links for our website, berdino.kg, and all the information that was used. And we are open for further cooperation, for possible collaboration, and we are open to provide more details and regarding our implemented work. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Murad. Talekan has to leave, yeah. So, okay, Murad will stay with us. I have a lot of notes, a lot of questions. We'll back to you later, and I will go to Prof. Candidate. I will go to Haji saja.
Thank you, Anna.
It's 5
Okay.
a.m. It's 5 a.m. in the morning, and so the screen and the time is yours. You have 15 to 20 minutes, and Mas Akbar, please make Haji co-host. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, please.
Please accept my apologies for the technical issues. Okay. Thank you very much. So my title is Decoloniality and Epistemic Justice, Rethinking Indigenous Religions and Contemporary Religious Studies, including theology. Many scholars argue that the impact of Western colonialism remains a powerful force in today's world. They contend that colonialism, in particular neo-colonialism, manifested in various forms and has many names. For instance, both Western and non-Western scholars now focus on the concept of Eurocentrism. But of course, you have this American also influence. This theorization by Latin American decolonial theorists, also taken up by some scholars in Africa and Asia, put an emphasis on assimilation as essential feature of colonial epistemic violence. Accordingly, I quote, Eurocentrism is generally defined as a cultural phenomenon that views the histories and cultures of non-Western societies from a European or Western perspectives. Europe, more specifically Western Europe or the West, functions as a universal signifier in that it assumes the superiority of European cultural values over those non-European societies. End quote. Despite criticism by non-Western scholars like activists and non-Western academicians, Eurocentrism is still the dominant view in knowledge productions, especially in the production of theological knowledge and religious studies. It is evident that humanities and social sciences deeply Eurocentric. Authors, writers, even researchers, most especially in theology and religious studies discourses or the study of religion. This paper, I divided into 3 parts to foster or problematization of Eurocentric knowledge production in humanities and social sciences. The first part explores the importance of the colonial option in knowledge production. The second part I will discuss a very short significance of decolonizing religious studies or the study of religion. And the last part will be a very short conclusion. Let's go to the first part. First, I explores the importance of the colonial option in the knowledge production. Since Western colonialism is ongoing global project where settlers continue to occupy land, dictate social, political, economic systems, they exploit the indigenous people in their resources. For example, in the Philippines, I argue that decoloniality is one of the conceptual and practical levels options to challenge this ongoing global project of the Western colonialism, bringing a decolonial lens to challenge and analyze the ongoing impacts of Western dominance in the knowledge production. Decoloniality or epistemic disobedience calls into question the basis of and the control of hegemonic knowledge, especially the white supremacy and racism and European privileges in the knowledge production, and shows a way to reaffirm the significance of situated knowledge. Hence, it rejects the hubris of zero-point epistemology. Accordingly, in relation to the first argument of first point, epistemic disobedience reject the notion that there is an orthodox religious studies approaches or Western canon of the study of religion that applies in various contexts and culture. More importantly, it condemned the epistemic violence. What we mean by epistemic violence? Epistemic violence is silencing the voices of marginalized groups like indigenous voices, knowledge, practices in the knowledge production. I quote Dodson, Spivak, etc., including Mignolo and Anibal Quijano. Equally important that decoloniality unmask and track the epistemic violence that eradicates other voices, non-Western or non-Eurocentric knowledge and wisdom in academia. At Dodson writes, I quote, is the epistemic side of colonialism is the devastating effect of disappearing knowledge, where local or provincial knowledge is dismissed due to privileging alternative, often Western epistemic practices, Western models and approaches. And let's go to the second part. Second part, for decades, theology, particularly Christian theology and Western European approaches in the study of religion or religious studies, dominates the theological and religious knowledge production. In fact, according to many decolonial scholars, theology and religious studies are avenues and tools to justify settler colonialism in general. Bringing decolonial options or decolonizing theology or religious studies offer the following points. First, decoloniality or epistemic disobedience holds, reject inferiorized non-Western or other epistemologies, but engendered epistemological pluralism like indigenous religions. Another important point that decoloniality offers, it fosters holistic, oriented, or intersectionality theological reflection that is grounded in the people experience, particularly in vulnerable and marginalized groups, a place, a history, and a nature. Lastly, epistemic disobedience developed an epistemological framework to value indigenous system of knowledge and spirituality. In conclusion, decoloniality invites us to rethink and problematize the privilege of Eurocentric knowledge production in humanities and social sciences, especially in theology, either that is Christian theology or Islamic theology. Religious studies or study of religion. Decoloniality unmasks the Eurocentric knowledge that pushing back on historical amnesia and phenomenon whereby settlers choose not to recognize the genocidal role of colonialism and epistemicide of the knowledge production from non-Western world. Decoloniality also centers indigenous people history and their continued resilience against erasure in extractions of their natural resources and even knowledge and wisdom and practices. Marketize what happened to the Philippines, remember, with this famous blogger, who used the tattoo traditions in the northern Philippines, and it became more controversial, and he garnered a lot of critiques about that. It argues that decoloniality argues that non-Western scholars to challenge these colonial narratives. Aside from this, as Gareth Fitzgerald, in his short essays, he writes, I quote, decolonial thought exposes the histories of violence that undergeared Europe's self-appointed status as the sole producer and fouvoir of knowledge. Confronting these histories and their enduring structural manifestation requires that we also confront the epistemic legacies of colonialism, particularly in the educational system, or in, like for example, in the curriculum in the Philippines. We are teaching John Dewey to the indigenous groups, and imagine that what John Dewey is taught, to do with this indigenous lifestyle. And their enduring structural manifestation requires that we also confront the epistemic legacies of colonialism that inherent within the Western academe. For example, in the Philippines, we are very Americanized and European in terms of our curriculum. In the study of religion, this includes confronting the Eurocentrism of the fields of divisional concepts and categories, and admitting the roles they have played in legitimizing the historic or enduring violence of Europe's colonial projects, especially in the Philippine politics, and how we practice and perceive democracy in the Philippines. So that's end my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Haje. Yeah, I think like in many countries in Asia, we know that education is an instrument for the new colonialism, right? Okay, now we have Dr. Samsul Marif. He's the director of Center for Religious and Cross-Cultural Studies, University of Gajah Mada. He will give his insight from the two presentation and maybe some reflection in Indonesia context. Okay, you have time. You have about 15 to 20 minutes to give your speech, and the time and screen is yours. Thank you. Mas Mas Akbar, can you please open?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
ready.
I think I get it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mbak Ana. Thank you very much, Murad Karipov and Haje Hasaje. Nice to see you again. Very nice. I apologize. We were in the plenary sessions. The plenary session lasted, like longer than expected. We had a very good discussion on that. So I think I I would just touch some points in relation to the presentation, and as Mbak Ana said, I think I could also share how we deal with that the issue in Indonesia. Let me start with the ones that that we deal on this subject: religious freedom, freedom of religion and or belief. Which we come to understand that this is like the international norm that we share, and that is what we reproduce, like knowledge we reproduce through, for example, religious studies, as Haji was explaining about. I mean, if we analyze, if we examine the concept of freedom of religion or belief as an international norm, in relation to the existence, to the persistence of indigenous religions or the religions of indigenous people, one thing that we could, I think, critically see is the bias that we have, on that international norm. In the ICCPR Article 18, the right to have or to adopt religion as a norm is I mean, using the perspective of indigenous people, using the perspective of indigenous religions, is bias. The right to have and to adopt religion is the right given to the followers of missionary religions, which cannot belong to indigenous people, at least in general. We probably have some cases that indigenous religions are also spread out, but in general, and especially if we, for example, look at how they reproduce their teaching, is not very much on converting others. That is not like the main subject or the main issue, the main points of their religiosity, but rather, to strengthen community, to strengthen ecological ties, how human beings in relation to their territory, to their environments. And so given the right to the missionary religions, like to have or to adopt religion, is giving actually the privileges, for them to do and to use their right. That right doesn't belong to the followers of indigenous religions. And if we relate that norm to the history, what we have seen up to now is that conversion is 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 historical actions that have been utilized, and especially if we bring that issue to how it is practiced in countries through policies. And scholars have talked about the politics of religious freedom, for example, and this is what religious studies have also contributed, is actually very much giving not only privilege, but legitimizing, the conversion practices. And so from that point, we can see how the international norm that has been, advocated of its inclusivity, that has been argued for its universality, basically has, politically, normatively, victimized, the followers of indigenous religions. And it is, of course, important for us to not only criticize that, but also like offer, a kind of insight that we can do in order to make, freedom of religion really universal. We're dealing the universality. I mean, religious freedom should be universal, and we're dealing with that. And in order to make it really universal, meaning inclusive to others, we have to, we have to keep promoting or accommodating, also the characteristic, listening the voices, and the voices of indigenous religions. And one of the characteristics, otherwise, knowledge production through religious studies would just strengthen the norm, the biased norm, of freedom of religion. And this is what we have been also dealing with, in Indonesia, struggling for how to include, indigenous religions, and also related rights of them, of theirs, as citizens in any countries, including like in Indonesia. So among the things that I think is very important, and I think this is also relevant to Murata Karikpo, talking about whatever we may define as religion. If we see the characteristic of, other religions that emphasize, for example, their, their ecological worldview, meaning emphasizing how humanity or community in relation to their territory, to their environment, should be part of the discussion. Me dealing with indigenous religion, for example, dealing with religion is not to, is not to criticizing it, to decolonializing it, is not to replace the word. Some scholars, we have seen from scholars of religious studies, for example, who have proposed, we better replace the word religion with, for example, faith or culture. To me, that won't help a lot, but I think we could deal with that, engage with that by making it more inclusive. And this is actually the main issue that we are dealing with in this conference, making, religious inclusive, making democracy inclusive by accommodating voices, the way people perceive their religiosity, the way people, perceive their, their existence. And one I have learned from, the religions of indigenous people is that, for example, if we talked about dignity is not about individuality, it's not about person, like one person, but it is more relational, meaning my dignity exists only in relation to the existence of others, the dignity of other human beings, the dignity of the environment. And so the very voice, among the fundamental worldview that we have learned from indigenous people articulating their religiosity is that it is not to exist, to have the dignity to exist only by ourselves, but in relation to others, because our existence is very much dependent on others. And that include like environments, that include about gender varieties. So the relationship of everyone, every being is in relational, and dignity is defined or understood in that way. So ICCPR to me claim to be universal inclusive. If the way we understand it today, the way we articulate it in religious studies for today, is still actually very biased and so exclusive. We need to bring it into, into that further. We need to bring it further, making it more inclusive by, taking, their part. If indigenous people understand their religiosity to be, their dignity to be relational, that is what we need also include. Include. And I think for developing religious studies, such things is important, to use, to take into account, to develop it. And that is how I think among the points that we could include in the discussion of the coloniality, in the discussion of, struggling for the rights in gender relations, and also in relation of relationship between humans and their environments. And so I'm trying to connect this, and this is what we have been also working in Indonesia. This is what what we mean by inclusive democracy is not only about economy, politics, social, but also ecological. Because what we have seen among the very issue that have disrupt people's lives is, basically the exploitations of the natural resources that have many, in fact, like direct impacts against the people living surrounding. And so freedom of religion should include, other issues. In these points is that, environment, and so must be seen as related right to other rights. We need to we need to bring them into together as relational, in the sense that once we talked about freedom of religion, we are talking about the rights of children, the rights of women, and so on and so forth. To me, the things that we want to develop more and more, to see, the struggle among many to come together for, for making the inclusivity, in a sense that whatever I talked about rights, I have to think about the rights of others. And so when I pursue my rights, in it, within that, inherent in that is the rights of others too. And I think the international norm must go to that, not focusing on, individuality only. So I think that's what I could share, Mbak Anna and Haje and Murav. Hope we can discuss from that further. Thank you very much. I see here Jonathan and Renata. Thank you very much for that. Back to you, Mbak Anna.
Okay, thank you, Mas Ancu. Okay, now it's time for the not question and answer also, but also additional information, komentar, or anything you want to share. You may raise your hand, or I personally would like to invite Jonathan. Jonathan, can you please unmute? Do you have any comment or insight or anything you want to share? Please. Okay. Okay. Jonathan will type his question. So maybe another participant want to raise a question? Or I will start with my question. Okay. Okay. So, Murad, yeah,
Mbak Arina, Murat is raising his hand.
oh, okay. Please, Murad.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to appreciate Mr. Samsul Marif for his presentation. It was great, regarding his presentation. I identified that we have a lot of some mutual points that can be also discussed in details. And I see that his activities, they are also involved with the great components of analysis. So it means that it's really great honor to get a lot of useful information, details, and I think it will be great if we can exchange our contacts and we can get more and more some details about your activities implemented, because it will be really great to initiate, to collaborate and to initiate some kind of exchange between ideas and our vision. Because here, I was really surprised that we have some also some correlation and some similar points regarding the implementation of the projects, about the implementation of the activities on the local level. I mean, because it's great, interesting point that, for example, in Central Asian region, and especially in Kyrgyzstan, we have quite similar situation like you identified in your region. So it's really great, and thank you so much for such opportunity to discuss and to share our presentations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Murad. Or maybe before my question, Haji, do you want to add some more points? Please.
Yes, same with Murat. I really appreciate what Professor Samul said. In the Philippines, we're still struggling to include the voices, not only by because of the voices of the indigenous, but also the marginalized and vulnerable communities in the Philippines, because the Philippines, we have this elite democracy, but now we have popular government from which is elected president, the son of the previous dictator in the Philippines.
Okay, back to you later, Haji. Okay, Jonathan type his question on the chat box. Or okay, I will read the question for the viewer on YouTube. So the question is, okay, thank you, Murad. Okay, so Jonathan said that I appreciate how you understand and advocate for human rights and minority group using survey data. This helps to show both the individual and the community impact of discrimination. In your data, you found that major concern for community members was about economic and employment. How do you think in your specific case that we can advocate for both protection of human rights as well as socio-economic rights together? Okay, you may respond to that, Murad.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for such great question. First of all, if we are thinking about how to combine these two components about the human rights protection and the promotion of and improving the situation regarding the socioeconomic situation in the country, especially, I will share our vision of our organization, Verduna Kyrgyzstan, and we first of all, we identified that it's a great correlation between these two aspects. And in this regard, we decided it was the direct recommendations from the indigenous people and from the local communities. It's necessary to, first of all, to increase the level of their involvement in policy decision making process. So, because that's why, because they are directly and more well informed about how to solve the local issues, how to increase the situation, socioeconomic situation, and all the indicators. And I mean that if we, I think this actually is common for all the countries of Central Asian region. When the authorities, they try to conduct their activities, they have own projects, but they usually try to isolate the civic society. They try to isolate the local communities from this policy making process, because they maybe they are afraid that it will be some kind of, you know, maybe intentions to get the authority on do something like this. And in this regard, with the main key recommendation is to increase the involvement of the local communities in this process. And also this can be actually achieved by creation of the some mutual working groups with the involvement of the leaders of the local communities, of indigenous people, of the minorities, of the youth and civic experts and civic society, with the also with invitation of the national authorities, because it's very important to prove them that the mutual cooperation is more profitable for the national departments for themselves, you know, because actually, like for example, in this regard, the role of our NGO was to create some kind of communication bridge between the local communities and the national departments. And at the end of our activities, you know, the situation changed for, how to say, 360 degrees. So I mean that for example, if at the beginning of our activities, national departments, they were also like isolated, they were close to in providing the information, and they were limited in cooperation. But after several months, about after 1.5 of the year, their position quite changed. So nowadays they try to involve and invite us as experts for their working groups, for their activities, because they understood that our activities have positive impact. And actually we as NGOs and experts, in many cases we implement their work, which is the responsibility of the national departments, and they understood this profit for them. And that's why it's very great, actually, example of possible cooperation. And this actually process can solve the situation regarding and improve the situation regarding the human rights and the socioeconomic sphere. And it will be really great, you know, some kind of symbiosis between the civic society and national departments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Murad. Okay. I have a question for Haji and also Murad. Okay, thanks, Murad. Jonathan says thanks, Murad. Okay, first to Murad. Okay, this is my personal question because I don't know anything about Central Asia. Okay, the only thing I know it's like a lot of country on a very close okay places. And when you mention about local community, I wanted to know about how do you define local community in the context of there is a lot of war and refugee and also what is happening with the community on the border area, how they define the locality as or togetherness, or how they define the refugee on the border area, how they try to collect themselves and feel the togetherness, and how and what they do on the border area, okay, to struggle to all of the problems, to face the problem that you've mentioned on your presentation. Okay, that's for Murad. And for Haji, my question is continuing Prof. Ancu komentar. Are you agree that human rights regime is also uphold the colonial thinking, and do you see any opportunity on that on your decolonizing works? Okay, thank you. Please, Murad.
Thank you, Anna. A great question. First of all, I would like to emphasize that in our country, local communities define themselves like because our country is mountainous, situated in mountainous region, and we have a lot of communities who are situated in border regions. They are living in such areas, and it's easy for them to define themselves like some kind of big families with the relatives, and usually in many cases they know each other for very well for more than even decades and a lot of years, and they have really well sustainable relations between each other, and so that's why we have such a specific definition like the local communities, because it's very easy to identify them, and it's some of the how to say peculiar points of these local communities. They are all citizens of the Kyrgyz Republic in our country, and they also big groups of people, and maybe it wasn't their own personal decision to live for many years in border regions, but they get used for such conditions. That's why, and because it's because of the socio-economic situation and also ecological situation, but they try to live in such conditions, and it's very important point to that should be emphasized, that regarding, in spite of all the disasters and risks, including socioeconomic aspects and the ecological and even political and border conflicts, anyway they try to protect their rights, protect themselves, especially when we're talking about the rights of women and girls, who are especially the main victims of such violence and acts of aggression. But anyway, they try to, for example, when we cooperate directly with them, they usually identify some specific points that should be solved regarding the, for example, it's first of all, it's a very important point that should be underlined to find the process regarding the demarcation of the border. I mean, about the identification, the borders between the countries in Central Asian region, especially between our country and Tajikistan. And it will be one of the key solutions of all the problematic issues. And also, regarding your question about how they define themselves, it's even for all people here, especially who are members of such local communities, it's very easy for them to define themselves, because it's some kind of sustainable habit to live in one in one specific district in the country, and that's why it's not a problematic for them.
Okay. Thank you, Murad. So Haji, Jonathan also have question for you. Okay. I will read for the viewer on YouTube. Wait. The task to decolonize our curriculum and concept of religion is a massive and important one. Your example about how to reform the Eurocentric curriculum in the Philippines were fascinating. Regarding theories of religion, do you have some suggestion of how concept of religion originating from the Philippines can challenge Eurocentric colonial ideas of religion? Thank you. Yeah, I think it's the similar sense with my question. Do you see any opportunity?
Okay, Jonathan, thank you very much. He's a doctor, no? Jonathan, thank you very much for this. Is a very good questions actually. Well, I think we have since we engage now, basically, this effort of decolonizing curriculum is not new in the Philippines, because I know you are familiar with these struggles in Southeast Asia. Philippines was colonized by Spain for almost 300 years. And I think from then we started to struggle, to call for post-colonial, contextual, relevant curriculum that can empower the community and include a very inclusive curriculum, like the experience and lifestyle of the indigenous people. But of course, this is still a project and ongoing project in the Philippines. Well, in terms of theories, I don't have, I think, problem to Western or European American theories of religion. But for me, as Professor Alatas from University of Malaya argues that we need to have equal um, treatment on non-Western theories of religion. If Filipino will study the Western or European American theories of religion, they also need to have curriculum equally, treatment how they study and value European or Western theories of religion. But of course we have developing literatures now written by Filipino scholars and also foreign scholars that contributed to formulate non-Western approaches and theories of religion in the Philippines, including our neighbors from Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, etc., etc. Yes, I think the word, for me personally, the concept of religion is still very American and European in the Philippines, especially to most established religion or institution like Catholic, Protestant, mainline Protestant churches, including Islam in the Philippines, no. But of course, this is now debatable and under critique of many emerging scholars in the Philippines, because basically the concept of religion is very Western. Prior to Western, colonial period in the Philippines, actually we have, spirituality, no, because some scholars, Filipino scholars, preferred to use the word spirituality than religion, because spirituality is more, more inclusive and very non-institutionalized, but of course that is still debatable. That is still debatable among Filipinos. Now, again, thank you very much for that questions. So that's why one of our aims is to develop and to inspire scholars to write, Filipino scholars to write and produce and publish books. To the questions that human rights is Western, yes, of course, they are very Western. Well, I think there are advantages and disadvantages. But of course, I need to recognize that there are still debates ongoing now in the Philippines, because this kind of human rights model from the West, it's now debatable, especially among Muslim communities. Because if you use, Western perspectives of human rights, like for example, equality among women and men, if you bring that in the Muslim community, that is, still debatable among them. And also in the indigenous community, if you impose this equality among men and women, no? Because it's very different, no? It still need to interrogate and to challenge and to need to further dialogue. Because I think in response to this Western model of human rights, imposed categories imposed by the West is already challenged by the Arab nation. In fact, they published, human rights, universal human rights according to Islamic perspective. But I would like someday, vision to have universal human rights from the perspective of indigenous communities based in Southeast Asia. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Haji. Prof. Anju.
Sorry, additional.
Okay.
The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is also very Christian.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So that's also problematic for me.
You want to explore more about that? It's very Christian. It's not only Western, but also very Christian. Yeah. Okay. Prof. Anju, do you want to respond to the invitation? Should we have like human right on the definition? And the definition of human right is from the indigenous indigenous people. Do you want to respond to that invitation?
Sure. But I think, I mean, to me, I still subscribe that human rights, including religious freedom, the right of other issues, we understand that the struggle for that is for everyone. And I think, like me, understanding that way is that it is important to subscribe, to take it, to carry it. What we need to do further is, is to make it applicable, is to make it acceptable, is to make it working for taking, the uh, for thinking everyone's to make it universal, to make it inclusive. I mean, the more we learn, the more we interact with like indigenous people, women, disabilities, children's, the more we study about them, the more we learn about those who are the victims of crisis, climate change. I think the more we come to see that human right is a very complicated issues. Religious freedom is a very complicated issues, and so we need to go further on that. So in relation to that, actually, I mean, this is what we are trying to do. We want to contribute to that. We want to contribute in making human rights as universal as it is, as workable as we expected. But in relation to that, if I may have a question to Murat, this just like another way of thinking or finding ways of thinking the subject. So if Murat's concerns in his case, in your case, Murat, about climate and crisis, of the situation I expect, I mean, as we have seen in many cases, including in Indonesia, the climate change or even like the crisis, environmental crisis or political crisis, always involve many varieties of issues to think about. And that have actually pushed me to see or to learn about human rights concept as more complicated as we could, to think about its encompassing issues. So have you ever thought like how to think the right to the environment? I mean, this is to Murat, the right of children, the victims, in relation to like environment, religious. Have you thought that those issues are interrelated, and have you come up with, if you have you come up with a way of dealing with it, seeing rights of people, and those rights are in relation to others, political, cultural, social, economic, environmental rights. Have you thought those things as in relation to one another? Mbak Ana, so back to you.
Okay, before Murat respond to that question, I saw Renata raise hand. Please, Mbak Renata.
Okay.
So we were
Thank you.
yellow today.
Yes. Thank you. I'm sorry, I joined in the middle of the discussion, so I missed the first presentation. Yeah, so I only catch the last presentation from Anshu. But I think from what I understand from the discussion before, I would like actually to. I'm trying to remember the yesterday sessions. Yeah, there is one session I think someone from Malaysia. So I think it during the session, and then I think now I'm trying to remember to compare, yeah. So I think for Indonesia, identification of being local, being indigenous, being different from the other race or the other ethnic or the other religion is a counter narrative post-colonialism. But I think, and then it's also important. It's also to counter the dictatorial regime, yeah, during Suharto, that oppressing the differentiation of ethnicity and religion. But it's also, I think it becomes, in a way, it brings a negative impact as well, because then the increasing of local autonomy is also increase the being indigenous supremacy or local supremacy, yeah. And in a way it's also oppressing the less ethnicity or the minority groups among the bigger ethnicity groups, yeah, or among the religious groups, like for Islam, and then we have a problem with Ahmadiyya, for example. So and it's also interesting to hear to listen to someone from Malaysia yesterday, that they can, after the colonization, they actually define themselves and dividing themselves between Malay, Indian, and Chinese, and they provide, they have is discriminating against the Chinese and Indian, and provide more advantages, yeah, advantages by to the Malay. And but it actually, for these young people now, they see that there is no benefit actually for the Malay, and they say that it's the trend in Malaysia is actually now becoming interesting, because it's to reduce the favoritism, to reduce the discriminations, you know. So that's interesting. I mean, because in Indonesia, I think the trend is, we are still on processes. We are still in process of how to counter those local supremacy. However, there are some narrative about public interest. There are some narrative about inclusivity that starting to be the main narrative, yeah, for us to address and to counter the local supremacy. So I'm just interesting to understand how the other region, yeah, from Philippines, my understand, and then from Central Asia, how whether do you have the same stories, do you have the same experience, how do you address that kind of situation? And I think listening to Haji atau Murad, who about the decolonizing the curriculum, I think how are you, whether you put, when you're trying to decolonizing the curriculum, whether you use the locality identity as an entry point, you know, or do you use a public interest, for example, and public values or democratic values as the main values to bring together different groups, yeah. So just that's actually my questions. Thank you, Mana.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Renata. Okay, Murad, you may respond to that, and after Murad, Haji.
Thank you, Renata, and thank you, Mr. Samsul Marif. Real great questions. First of all, I would like to respond for the first question. And you know, regarding when we are talking about the right of the people who live, especially about the group of indigenous people, people of the local communities, you know, it was a great example of this identification case regarding the during the period of COVID-19 spreading. I think actually this case, and it's also possible that can be said that it's similar to the different regions, not only for the Central Asia, but also for the South Asian countries, because our countries, and especially the vulnerable groups and indigenous people, they were not prepared. I think not even all people, didn't expect such results, such activity, such situation. And in this case, our NGO, Birduna Kyrgyzstan, we actively promoted and protected the rights of the local communities for the sufficient environment in our country. And in this regard, we decided to create the working groups in order to deliver the voices of the local communities for the national authorities, for the policymakers. And also in this regard, I see the correlation between these rights. For example, when we are talking about the environment, when we are talking about the socio-economic aspect and about and environmental, yeah, it's absolutely it's absolutely possible to correlate them. Because, for example, if we solve the issues that are important for the indigenous people, regarding the socio-economic aspect, it will directly influence and it will directly have impact on the economic, also in the environment and ecological rights. For example, this situation is in Kyrgyzstan, in our country. And also, when we try to, for example, we during our research work on the local level, we identified some specific issues that were important for the local communities. We got the real specific evidence that proved that showed the situation that these rights are not only correlated but also that they're interrelated, and if we solve some problematic issue in one local community, in one region, it will directly affect, it will have positive impact with, to other local communities. So in this regard, it's very important to closely cooperate with the leaders of the local communities, because they actually, in many cases, they are well informed, even more than, for example, some other civic experts, or like even some expert institutions, because they live in such conditions. And during the period of COVID-19, we identified that it's very important to improve the infrastructure and improve the situation regarding the human rights, because, for example, during the period of this pandemic, they increased the number of the domestic violence, increased the situation with the access of people for the main fundamental rights. And I think this can be a good lesson for all the NGOs in different countries and different regions that should be taken into account. And regarding the second question about the post-colonial situation and discussions, for example, in our country, it's also actual, because Kyrgyzstan, it was a lot of discussion, because our country is when we had different discussions, as identified like the heart of the Central Asia, and because we are situated in the middle of the Central Asian region, and in this regard, we are the object of the strategic geopolitical interests of China, of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan, and also Russian Federation, all of these countries, and including also the Western countries, because they also would like to increase their positions and their political presence in Central Asia with the assistance of our country. And that's why the discussions regarding the post-colonial situation, colonialism, and their further intentions and further plans is really complicated. And but anyway, because we try to concentrate our attention specifically on the situation with the human rights. We try not to involve in some political issues, and in this regard, we see that anyway we can be. I think, for example, regarding our country, we will be always some kind of object of some political interests and intentions of some other political powers and. Big political big countries, but anyway, in this regard, it's important for us to save and to protect our sovereignty and our independence. I think it's our position.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Murad. Haje, please.
Thank you, Dr. Renata, for the good. This is a very good questions. When it comes to the Philippines, this social segregation or classes actually like in compared to Malaysia, it's not basically not applied to the Philippines because I think in Malaysia it's it's entangled with religion, skin color. I don't know. I'm not familiar with Malaysia, but in the Philippines, it's more economic. The economic, if you use class analysis, more economic. The rich and the poor. But during the Spanish period, we have this Principalia, the upper class, which is who controlled, empowered by the Spanish government, controlled the land, the politics, and then you have this, the Catholic priest who, justify their works through religious languages. But in the Philippines today, it's more economics and social and political. But if you but if because in the macro level but in the micro you will see the struggles of the indigenous communities. That's why some indigenous communities, if they able to get some opportunities to leave the community, they become more they adopted, assimilate into this culture in the Philippines, the more Hollywood culture, because Filipinos are very Americanized by the Hollywood. The way we dress, the way we think, the way we also the K-pop. So they assimilate in this kind of culture. So, but I think my quick answer for that is it's more political, economic, and social segregation. But we don't have policy, like other countries like Malaysia. But in the Philippines, you will see the gap between the rich and the poor. It's very, very wide and very deep. You have billionaires, trillionaires, 20 families are trillionaires and billionaires, but the rest is under, struggling to survive.
Okay. But just quick questions. So if the economic and social are the main factor for the divisions among the communities, so when you talk about the colonization of curriculum, what is actually the main issue? Whether this is more social analytical issues?
My project,
or how?
Because we already explored, post-colonial approaches to analyze these struggles from the colonial impact in the Philippine society. I think in my group, at least small group, and me, my project is more on the political economic emancipation. I mean, challenges, because in the Philippines we are the oligarchs, the landlords, the regional landlords, warlords are very, very powerful. Like for example, it's basically reflected in the previous government in the Philippines, like Duterte. He's coming from Davao, south. So most of his allies and appointed officials in the government, he get from the south. That's why the north are clamoring, oh, why the south people are now getting the position in the publics, even they are not qualified, educationally, politically, in terms of skills and knowledge to run the public office. But the Duterte appointed them. So I think one of the struggles in the Philippines now is to have a national ideology, because we are very regional. we think regional, we think, this tribal mentality. Not actually, but now we borrowed this concept from the West, tribal mentality. But basically, we are very regional. I'm from the South, and you are from the Mindoro, Mindanao, South Philippines. I'm the North, from the North. Yeah, that's one of the problem, because the colonial mentality are embedded in our mind and soul. We act like Americans, with the Spanish blend with the Spanish culture, but the skin color of the Philippines are brown, but we are very white in our soul. So the decolonial would be start from the man, from soul, from individual, then challenge the political, economic issues in the Philippines. Even the famous Filipino sociologists in the Philippines are Walden Bello is saying that we cannot address poverty, corruption in the Philippines unless we include the political, economic struggles in the Philippines. We want land reform. Until now, land reform is problematic in the Philippines because most of the officials are the landlords, and their family is rooted from the Spanish, conquistador, something like that. And the indigenous is the direct communities who suffer from this land grabbing.
Okay, thank you, Haji. Okay, we almost come to the end of the session because we have to move to another panel. And I will give like 1 minute closing statement from Prof. Ancu and then Murad and then Haji. Thank you, Mbak Renata. Please, Prof. Ancu.
Thank you, Mbak Anna. It's very nice. It's always nice to have, discussion regarding to see how our countries, how we deal different but similar issues in each countries through which we can discuss and we could enrich it one another to make us aware that the subject that we are discussing, like human rights, the rights of, the rights of citizens, the rights of us, the rights of our people, are basically relate to one another, and enriching our thought, our thinking that way by sharing what we have in other countries would, I expect would bring us to think about the global citizenship through which we think about, universally, because that is what we are dealing, which is basically about the humanity itself. So we thank you very much. Thank you, Murad, for your participation in this conference. Haji, again, thank you also very much for your participation, and we expect to do more from this, from next year, the following year, and so on and so forth. And of course, thank you, Mbak Anna and Mbak Renata, Mbak Jonathan, and SCRS for facilitating this. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Okay, and Murad, 1 minute closing statement, maybe.
Thank you. I will be very brief. I would like to appreciate for such a providing opportunity and to share our vision, to share our ideas and experience regarding the implemented activities in Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia. And I think it will be very good if we have also some similar activities, similar discussions on actual topics in order to to develop maybe some specific recommendations and maybe to exchange our experience that can be implemented on the local level. And thank you so much, and I hope to see you, all of you, very soon. And thank you again.
Thank you, Murad, and please, Haji.
Thank you very much, Anna and Professor Samsul, and to the rest of ICIR. You're doing great. Congratulations. I really admire you and hope to work to collaborate more in the future, especially, human rights, Declaration of Human Rights from the indigenous community in Southeast Asia. And thank you, Murat and Dr. Renata. and Dr. Jonathan for the questions and discussions and insights.
Okay, thank you to all presenters and participants. And if you want to see, if you want to see again, we will still keep this video on the ICRS YouTube channel. And see you on the next panel and another panel. And the conference will still be, there will be like 20 more panels. You can see all the panels and the manual book. I already shared the manual book to Tolekan. You can ask her, Murad, and see you in another panel and in the next international conference.